John chapter 6, verses 1 through 4 today. John chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. John chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Let us read responsibly, alternatively. I'll read verse 1, and you can read verse 2 and so on. John chapter 6, verse 1. After these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias.
And much crowd followed him, because they saw the signs which he was performing on those who were sick.
Then Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples.
Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, were near.
This is the word of God. We are supposed to read the entire chapter, but because we don't have that much time, and we are going to read parts of it as we go, we are going to stop here at verse 4. But the title for the message is Bread and Water. Bread and water, something we like. Something you might like better is bread and wine, right? But, today is bread and water. Can we show my iPad? Is it connected? Oh, it's there. In this passage that we just read, verses 1 through 4, let us pick out, I'm going to point out a few of important terms that we need to think about. So, important terms, key terms. First, it says in verse 1, after these things. After these things, after what things? What is before chapter 6? Nobody knows? What is before chapter 6? Chapter 5 is before chapter 6, right? I'm very disappointed you don't even know that. To remind you, what we have studied in chapter 5, Jesus healed the sick at Bethesda, the man who was sick for 38 years. And then there was a controversy about how he healed on the Sabbath and made the man carry his pallet on the Sabbath. And then Jesus went on this short discourse about Sabbath and about how he's working because the Father is still at work. And then he continues on to talk about his relationship with the Father. And then he says, it basically concludes by saying, only if you really know the Word, if you know God, you should know me, kind of thing. So after these things, after all these events take place in chapter 5, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Second key term is, it says the Sea of Galilee, and in parentheses it says, or Tiberias. What's Tiberias? It's the same sea, but it's the Gentiles' term. The Jews called it Sea of Galilee or something else, but then this is the Galilean term. So basically the Gentiles' Gentile name for the Sea of Galilee. Why is he emphasizing or adding on the Gentile name? And third, it says in verse 2, a large crowd followed him because they saw the signs. In this entire chapter, Jesus and the Gospel of John, the author John, focuses a lot on, or mentions a few times, about signs that Jesus is performing. We are going to take a look at all these a bit later. And then fourth, it says, Jesus went up on the mountain and sat down. when Jesus goes up to a mountain and sits down with his disciples, what's he doing?
Pray.
He had a hard time hiking, so he's resting. No, this is a setting that Jesus always does before he starts to reveal his teachings. He goes to a mountain or a field and he sits down. That means he's ready to teach. So that means there will be a revelation of teaching. Jesus is teaching. We know what's going to happen here. Jesus sits down and he says, who's going to feed all these people? And then this is the miracle of feeding the 5,000, multiplying the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, right? But this miracle itself, will be a teaching. Okay, and then fifth, it says, now the Passover. What kind of feast, what kind of day is the Passover day? Passover is one of the most important 3 main feasts, and there are 8 feasts, or 7 or 8 feasts that the Jews observed. There are 3 feast seasons, festivals, where they come up to Jerusalem and show themselves, men of the Israelites. And Passover is one of them, one of the 3 main. And so this marks the beginning. Okay? What happens during the Passover? Passover is the season where they remember this word, something that we remember all the time. God's work of redemption. It's a day of redemption. From where? From Egypt. So this is the day of redemption. And so put this together. After these things, after Jesus had this conflict with the Jews about Sabbath, about Jesus' identity as the Son of God or same equal to God, and then Jesus went away, but people started to follow him because of the signs. So Jesus sits down to teach, and that was on the Passover. What do you think he will be teaching about? His teaching will be probably about redemption. See, from this chapter, it gets really interesting, because what I've been talking about in the introduction part, I don't know if you can remember, I did not even remember what was before chapter 6. Can you remember John chapter 1? All these things that we've been talking about in the themes in the Gospel of John, in relation to the Old Testament, the Genesis creation story. Remember all that? If not, God bless you. Thank you, because I can preach the same thing and you'll be like, wow, Pastor, that's so new. These days I'm worrying about, one of the biggest concerns that I have is what to preach, because I feel like I preached everything I knew, or I know. But you give me hope. You preach the same thing and you'll never know. So from chapter 6, it really reveals and emphasizes the fact that Jesus is the one that came from heaven to fulfill what the Old Testament has been talking about all along for 4,000 years, over years. And what the creation story now has an end, has some kind of connection. The Exodus story has some kind of connection. All these festivals. And one of the main things that John focuses on and emphasizes is these festivals, also known as holy feasts, holy festivals of the Jews. And so chapter 6 it says it's the Passover. And immediately after that, John, what's after chapter 6? Thank you. John chapter 7. Immediately after Passover, chapter 7 begins with, it was a feast of booths, which is the Feast of the Tabernacle. And so, Jesus, John is doing something with Jesus. Jesus portrayed as the giver or provider for the Passover. Not only the lamb of Passover, and Jesus, the provider of the Feast of Booths. So unless we understand what these feasts signify and foreshadow and prophesy, we would not understand what John is trying to do with Jesus, what Jesus is doing on these days. So we will continue on to talk about that probably next week. But in today's chapter, let us focus on chapter 6. In today's chapter, Jesus performs 2 miracles. I thought about making that into 2 different studies, but I have preached quite a bit on these both miracles before, so I'm not going to get too much into the actual story, trusting that you already know. And you probably heard of this first miracle very many times, feeding of the 5,000. This miracle, this incident is very, very important in the Gospels, because this is the only one miracle that is recorded in all 4 Gospels. So you can kind of imagine how important this must be in relation to Jesus' work and salvation. And there are many different meanings about 5,000, barley bread, barley loaf, and so on, but we are not going to get too much into it. But one thing, this miracle, in this miracle, Jesus provides food, specifically bread. Bread, later in this same chapter, Jesus speaks about bread of life. Bread of life. And he relates it to the manna that came down out of heaven. And then he says, I am the bread that came down out of heaven. This is the later part in this chapter. But according to the rabbinic Jewish understanding, bread is closely connected, directly connected with life. So when life, celebration, and Thanksgiving. Okay? So bread is something that you break together to celebrate something. After Jesus heals people, he says, give him some food, or there's eating taking place. Okay? So bread is given at important parts, in important places, to emphasize or to show Jesus giving, the action of Jesus giving life. So when Jesus gives bread, he's trying to transcend and send or transfer his life to the people. Just like the Last Supper. Okay? And as in communion, we also practice that too. Because man shall not live by bread alone, but man does live by bread. Okay? Physically, we depend on bread. Bread that doesn't only refer to the wheat or barley bread. It speaks about food. that gives us life. So how is it related to this Passover? Passover is a time when you are given new life. The life that is supposed to die in Egypt is given a chance, a new life. The life that used to be slave, becoming children, son of God, God's firstborns. It's a new life, and as soon as the Israelites came out of Egypt and into the wilderness, God started to provide them what is considered necessary for life. And what are those? What is necessary for life in general? If you were to pick three things, and one of them is food, bread, what are the other two that you might think of?
Water and breathe. Air.
Water and air. One more thing. Water, because that's part of the title. Bread and water. One more. We'll talk about that later. So Jesus here provides bread, saying he is providing life. Second miracle that takes place in this chapter is Jesus walking on water. Jesus walks on water to come and save his disciples from this great trouble of storm, something that they thought would kill them. And the authority and the ability to control water, have authority over water, was considered very, very important. I will explain that a bit later. So in these two miracles, there are common things. Common in these two miracles. Let's think about that. There was trouble. In the first miracle, what was the trouble? What was the problem? Hunger. In the second miracle, what was the problem? Storm. These are two things that we pray to God about. Hunger is daily food, daily life, how we live. Something that is not so urgent or so emergent, okay? It's not an emergency. It's not a life-threatening matter, but it is a necessity. It's a need. Storm, however, is a life-threatening matter, and you are really crying out. Either way, if this hunger is not taken care of, this daily food is not taken care of, we will die. If this storm, this danger of storm is not calmed, is not gotten rid of, you will die also. But here, we know that Jesus had an answer. I pray that we may remember, whether we are praying for this daily needs, hunger, or we are praying about something more threatening or something more urgent. Either way, Jesus has an answer. Can we believe that?
Amen.
The thing is, it is not easy to remember when you have storm and wind in front of your eyes and you're about to be blown away. The boat is about to turn over. It's not easy to remember it's under control or Jesus has the answer. But Jesus tests his disciples on both cases. He says in the first one, he says to Philip, where are we going to buy food for all these people? And then Philip goes right into human thinking, trying to find solution on this earth, and says 200 denarii is not enough to feed all these people. One denarius is 1 day's wage. So 200 denarii is 200 days' wage, about close to a year's wage, right? If you take out holidays and everything, right? Now, to feed about 5,000 people. But Jesus' answer is not that. What he's looking at is, where are you seeking for that answer? On this earth? Or are you drawing the answer from heaven? Same thing with the second miracle. They're stuck in that storm. Right? Who are they calling out to? Which direction are they looking? See, Jesus' answer for the first one is he provides bread. And second, he walks on water. Walking on water is showing us that he has control over the water. The water cannot suck him in. The water cannot overcome him. This bread in itself represents Jesus himself. Later he explains. But this is amazing because he's referring back to the manna. And do you know what's the miracle about manna? The fact that it came down every day? No. The miraculous thing about manna is that it's a heavenly food. It's from heaven. Right? You believe that? But it has a physical form. Heavenly thing is supposed to be spiritual, but it has a physical. And furthermore, you have to eat that physical food to your physical body. And then Jesus says in John chapter 6, 49 and 50, this will give you eternal life. Now, eternal life, spiritual or physical? It's a spiritual power. It's a heavenly thing. So, it's a heavenly thing that came down in the form of a physical thing on this earth. You find it on this earth, on the ground, and you eat it and you will have spiritual effects. That in itself is a miraculous thing. But do they know this? See, this word that we are learning, this church that sits on this earth, and Jesus who came down in the human form, same thing. We are taking it into human knowledge. It's a knowledge exercise. You're listening, you're remembering, you're taking it in, digesting, analyzing, criticizing. But then, if you eat it right, if you take it in right, you will have spiritual, heavenly effects. I pray that we will all be able to experience the heavenly effect that comes from eating this food, this physical food. That is God's grace, because we cannot get into the spiritual world to take benefit, to gain benefit from the spiritual things. He wraps it up in a physical form and lets us consume it in a physical way, but have a spiritual effect, heavenly effect. So this bread is connected to heaven somehow, right? This word, if you don't think of it as it is connected to heaven somehow, maybe you should better go to school and learn better knowledge. Go on YouTube. It has a lot more good information delivered in a better way. Why are you here Wednesday? Why are you here on Sunday? Why do we spend our time, money, and effort to come if it is not for the heavenly gift? Jesus walks on water and he doesn't fall in. Why? Because he's connected. Don't think about, it's not a physical string connected that he's hanging on, but because he is connected to heaven, because he's a heavenly being, the earthly dangers, the earthly water, and the law of nature cannot overcome him. The earth, the world will say, 100% you step on that water, you will sink in. But that did not apply to Jesus. Why? Because he's water from above, and the sea is the water below. The water below cannot harm the water from above. Jesus' answer to us: are we praying to God because we have a storm about to hit my face in front of me? Or are we seeking to God and praying because we have daily problems or daily needs? Either way, he's saying, seek from above. And if you can belong to where Jesus came from, if you can also have that connection, that storm will not harm you. Amen?
Amen.
There's chaos. This water on earth represents chaos. But water from heaven represents salvation. Secondly, after Jesus gave this solution, this answer to the trouble, there's after or before, in relation to this solution, there is giving of thanks in both cases. John chapter 6, verse 11, and John chapter 6, verse 23. Let us read both verses. John chapter 6, verse 11. Are you going to see it real quick? John chapter 6, verse 11. Jesus then took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated, likewise also the fish, as much as they wanted. Now, Jesus gave thanks. And this word, eucharisteo, this word eucharisteo means, charis means grace. What does you mean? You. Utopia, euphemism, something good, but it also means to make happen, right? It means it means good, or it also means to make happen. Eucharisteo is validate God's grace. God's grace is upon you already. Believe it. When you believe that God has already solved the problem, what's the natural thing that comes out of your mouth? Thanksgiving. turn it around. If you give thanks, it validates God's grace upon you. Same thing, John chapter 6, verse 23. There came other small boats from Tiberias near to the place where they ate the bread after the Lord had given thanks. Right? They came, after the storm was calmed, they came back to the place of thanksgiving. So I pray and urge you, if you have any trouble, what's the solution? Jesus has the solution. How do you validate that solution? How do you activate that solution? Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving. Not because we're mandated to give thanks. Not because, sometimes I say, yes, I give thanks. But my heart doesn't really give thanks. I'm just saying it because I have to. Do you think that will work? I don't know. Maybe sometimes because of God's mercy and compassion. But if we really believe God has that solution, whether He gives it to me or not, I will say, thank you, God, you have the solution. And if I believe that I am part of, He knows what I'm going through, and I am part of His plan, then I can just give thanks. Third, sign. There's signs versus physical needs are met. Both times it speaks about signs. John chapter 6, verse 14. John 6:14. Therefore, when the people saw the sign which He had performed, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." Okay? So they saw the sign, and they said, "This is the prophet." John chapter 6, verse 26. John 6:26. Jesus answered them. Jesus answered them and said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled." They kept on following Jesus. After they followed Jesus from Bethesda, right? Because they saw the sign of Jesus healing the sick. And they were wondering, what does He do? What will He do again now? And so they came, and Jesus fed the 5,000, multiplied the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Right? What would you do? Would you follow Him now? Again? This is amazing. This is fun. First, He heals the sick. Now He gives us food. Sickness is taken care of. Your need for food is taken care of. Right? Your medical needs, your daily food. And so, what do? They want to make Him king. He Himself is Social Security. He Himself is welfare. He Himself will, as long as He can do that, continue to do that, our country can be wealthy and strong. We will be healthy. Why do we come to Jesus and why do we follow Jesus? Jesus says, is it because you saw signs? Or is it because you were given bread to eat? What is our prayer and why do we follow Jesus? Because we want Jesus to fill our needs, because we want Jesus to heal us, give us food, and make us rich, or make us comfortable, and answer our prayers. Is it? No? No, really? Think about what we pray for, what we seek for. And if He doesn't do it for us, think about where we will be. And Jesus says, is it because of all those that you see, that you receive, that you keep on following? What is a sign? Semeion in Greek. What is a sign? Sign is something that represents, something that signifies. Sign is something that points an arrow towards the goal. Right? When you're driving, you have road signs. Right? And when the road sign says 5 kilometers to Norcom 2, we don't stop at that sign. That sign has a message, and we understand the message, and we travel 5 more kilometers to come to church. Right? Sign has a message. So these signs, even though this man with 38-year-old paralysis and sickness was healed, that healing itself should not be the main message. It's a sign to tell them what? It's a sign to tell them something about Jesus. Right? The discourse, the teaching that followed after that was about Sabbath, about Jesus' relationship with the Father. That's the message that sign holds. Feeding of the 5,000 also has a message. But many times, in this context, people were caught up with these signs and miracles. I want to see somebody getting healed again. I want to see you multiplying things or giving us food again. Their purpose, their end becomes that which was used to be a sign. John 6:31. Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, He gave them bread out of heaven to eat. Jesus is speaking about, Jesus fed them bread to give them a lesson, give them a teaching about the spiritual manna. And so this is why we follow and keep on seeing and seeking for miracles. But miracle is a physical event, extraordinary event, that takes place with a purpose to teach a spiritual truth. You might wonder, and all those people who used to believe at the pool of Bethesda, they might be wondering, why did Jesus not heal me? Why did Jesus heal only that guy? It's not fair. But Jesus' purpose is not to heal everybody. Jesus' purpose is to send a message, speak a message. Remember the guy who was he blind? And Jesus' disciples asked him, why? Why is he blind? Is it because of his parents' sins or his own sins? Jesus says, no, it is to glorify God. What is the focus of our life, of your life, and why do we follow Jesus? John chapter 6, verse 32, 6:32. Jesus then said to them, truly, truly I say to you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven. The true bread. Verse 33, for the bread of God is that which comes down out of heaven and gives life to the world. So he defines what bread is. Verse 35, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. So here, Jesus speaks what he intended to deliver when he fed the 5,000. So let us think about this again. Trouble. This is something common about our lives. Who has the answer? I believe Jesus gave us already the answer. How do we activate it? Validate that grace? Through thanksgiving. But through that, may that incident become a sign that will cause us to continue to follow Jesus. Not hold on to that miracle, but hold on to the one that the miracle is pointing to. And come to understand about him a little more. Now as conclusion, John demonstrates that Jesus is the redeeming Lord by showing us that he is the God who created. Meaning, John is trying to prove that Jesus is the Messiah. He's the one that can redeem and save. And how do you qualify that? How do you know? How can you say Jesus is really the Lord of salvation, the Lord of redemption? He's the one that came to fulfill the covenant. John is proving to the readers, easy, he says. It's because two things. Jesus is the Lord, or Yahweh, who redeemed Israel from Egypt. Throughout the Gospel of John, John brings this topic back. Secondly, he says, Jesus is the God who created. He's the creator. Because he created, he can redeem. Easy argument, right? Can you believe? Would you be able to believe? Did I tell you about Henry Ford story?
Yes.
Yeah. Right? The creator of the car can easily fix the car. He knows what's wrong with the car by the. So because God is the creator, he can redeem. He can save. Now, how does John argue for that? John chapter 5 it speaks about the Sabbath. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. John chapter 6, Jesus is the provider of bread and food. And Jesus has control or authority over water. John chapter 7, we didn't go there yet, but John chapter 7, remember Jesus on the Feast of Booths, he comes to the temple and he says, if anyone is thirsty, come to me. Those who believe in me will have water of life flowing out of their belly. Giver of water. Provider of water, which is the Holy Spirit, it says. And then John chapter 8. Remember the question I asked? What are the three things that we need other than the air? Right? Bread, water, and light. Jesus says, I am the light of this world. See? Chapter 5 about Sabbath. Chapter 6 about food, bread, and moving of the waters. John chapter 7, also about water. John chapter 8, about light. Do you see something here? Can you turn that around? Genesis chapter 1, day 1, creation day, day 1. God creates light. Day 2, God moves the waters. Waters were moved or split, separated. Day 3, God moves the waters to cause ground to produce food. Okay? Fruit-bearing plants and seed-bearing plants. God provides food. Days 4 through 6 are what governs the light, what governs the water and the expanse, what governs the food chain, what the beast and the man, right? And then day 7 is the Sabbath. Do you see? Sabbath, food, water, light. I need to study a little more to figure out why John goes backwards. Maybe redemption, you have to go backwards. Trace backwards. And then, so here John is using this creation theme to say, see, Jesus is redoing, remaking, recreating through his work. Remember, Jesus said, my Father is still working. What kind of work does Father do? Father does the creation. Because mankind has fallen, he's recreating. And that's what Jesus is doing. And then, secondly, when Jesus walked on water to the disciples who were frightened and thought that he was a ghost, and Jesus came and said, this is in John chapter 6, verse 20, he says, it is I. In Greek, it's ego eimi. Ego eimi means I am. I am. Where did you hear that word? That name? Yahweh. When God appeared to Moses in Exodus chapter 3, the burning bush, Moses asked him the name. He says, I am who I am. That's Yahweh. Right? From there came the name Yahweh. Direct translation into Greek is ego eimi. I am. Which literally means in Hebrew, I was, I am, and I will be. Meaning, I am at every time, in any time period. I am. When they were frightened, Jesus comes and says, I am. John emphasizes this, and he just kind of subtly puts that in there. But he reinforces it by verse, if you can turn to John chapter 6, verse 23. All along, he's referring to Jesus as a Son of Man or Son of God, Jesus, or different names. But here he says, there came other small boats from Tiberias near to the place where they ate the bread after the Lord had given thanks. This word Lord is a direct translation of Jehovah in the Old Testament, which was a name to replace Yahweh. So another name, a watered down name for Yahweh, I am, is Lord in the Old Testament. And here he reinforces, after Jesus says, I am, he says, he's the Lord. He's the Jehovah, he's the Yahweh. This is the Yahweh who came not only to save Israel, to provide for them, but to save now the Gentiles too. Remember Tiberius? He expands the range. He says, not only to the Jews, but to the Gentiles, to anyone who would come and believe me. We believe and follow Jesus not only because he feeds us and saves us from our troubles, like the storm and wind, but because he is the God of creation. Because he is the Yahweh, the Lord, who saved Israel from Egypt. I pray that you may believe in that God. I pray that that God is alive in your life.
Amen.
Again and again, I emphasize, why be a Christian when God is not alive in your life? Why follow this religion if God is not alive? But God is alive. So all we need to do is to knock and seek. And lastly, let us read verse 36 through 40 and we'll finish. John chapter 6, verses 36 through 40. But I said to you that you have seen me, and you yet do not believe. See? He's alive. He's there. But even after seeing him, it says, yet you do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me. He's speaking about those who believe. Right? And the one who comes to me, I will certainly not cast out. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of him who sent me, that of all that he has given me, I lose nothing, but raise it up on the last day. For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who beholds the Son and believes in him will have eternal life, and I myself will raise him up on the last day. We believe and we follow him because we are, not because of what he gives us, not because he calms the storm, but he calms the storm because we follow him, because we are his children. We follow and believe him not under the condition of what he can give to us and what he will do for us. We follow him because he's our Father, because we are his children, because Jesus is the God of creation. Let us find pride in that, because Jesus said, all that the Father gives me, it will come to me, and Jesus will never lose them. May we be the ones that are chosen by our Father to come to Jesus. And may we never leave him. And Jesus says, I will never leave them. I will make sure to raise them up. May our God, our Father, raise you up even today, even if you are down. And may God, our Father, raise up Zion Church. Let us pray.